Hi everyone and welcome. Today it's me, Nigel Pollack, currently President of the Psychotherapy and Counselling Federation of Australia, here with Jodie Gale, who is currently the Deputy Convenor of PACFA College of Psychotherapy. Jodie is a practicing psychotherapist and is a business coach for counsellors and psychotherapists. She's a parent and she runs the successful Facebook group, Opening the Door on Private Practice. Welcome, Jodie.
Thanks for having me, Nigel.
Yeah, great to have you here. We'll start by acknowledging country. I'd like to acknowledge the Gumbungay people of the north coast of New South Wales, which is where I'm currently sitting, and to acknowledge their ancestors and their elders, past and present, and pay my respects.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm on the northern beaches of Sydney, which is Guyamaigal and Gadigal country, and I'd like to acknowledge past, present, and emerging. Thank
you. Beautiful part of the world. So, Jodie, what if we start off, from the beginning? I like to get the story from the beginning. This conversation is about you and your practice and how you came to be a psychotherapist that you've become, and what the story is behind that, because we know that within our professions there really is a story behind every practitioner's journey. We work in a space where every practitioner is unique, and every dyad between therapist and client is unique, and that's sort of born out of where each of us has come from as a person in this world. So where would you like to begin? Where does your story begin, Jodie?
Yeah, I think as you're talking it, what was coming to mind was wounded healer, and I said I am on the northern beaches of Sydney, and if I think back over my life, I always felt very out of place here. A lot of my girlfriends at high school were out sort of long blonde hair and wearing wetsuit dresses, and I just thought this was, why would you do that? And this is in the 80s, and I looked like Pink before Pink was even born. So I had bleach blonde hair, I had Doc Marten boots, and I just didn't fit in. And I was very, very rebellious. I was very angry. I didn't know why. I had an eating disorder, but didn't know it was an eating disorder, because it wasn't until Lady Diana at the time did her interview and talked about having bulimia, and I thought, oh, that's what I've got. Oh, I didn't realize that was a problem. I thought it was just a really great way of losing weight, and seeing that didn't make me do anything at that time, but it sort of got me thinking, oh, maybe there's something wrong somewhere. And so I left school at 15, very rebellious. I think the last thing I said, excuse my language, was fuck off, and off I went. And I became a hairdresser. So my mum worked for Weller for 30 years. And she said, well, if you're not going to go to school, you can get a trade. And so she got me an apprenticeship at a place called Get Smart in the city, in Sydney, on Clarence Street. And it was a very trendy salon, and I just loved it. I was, I think most of my friends went on and, did 11 and 12, but I, went and worked there and just was very naughty, got up to loads of mischief, and something I say to my kids now, I hope you two don't end up feral like I was. And I spent most of my teenage years going out, partying, drinking, and then once I was old enough, I discovered recreational drug taking, and so ended up very much down that path. And in the late 80s, in the very early Sydney rave scene. And you'll have to forgive me, by the way, I've got a little bit of allergies and cold, so I can hear myself being nasal. So I spent the last, the late 80s really into house music and partying and going and doing people's hair all day the next day, and not a very good state, but I was a very, very good colour technician. And, you know, I'm 53. I'm actually quite grey, but I've been colouring my hair red since I was like 13 or 14. So, yeah, and I mean, that was such an exciting time. We did loads of famous people's hair, like In Excess, and I gave Paloma Picasso a blow dry, and it was just lots of fun. But I remember thinking at the time, they should really give us counselling training, because the amount of problems that people talk about when they're having their hair done. Yeah, so then I went off after that to, well, I was sent off. I was sent to live with Auntie Jan in New Zealand to get my act together, whatever that was. And after that, just decided I'd always wanted to travel, so I moved to London. I was still hairdressing at the time, and yeah, hanging out with a bunch of friends that I'd met in New Zealand, still getting up to lots of trouble in the London rave scene in the 90s, early 90s, and really having the best and the worst of days, weeks, months, and years. And that was through, you know, recreational drug use, like massive highs on the weekends and massive sort of lows. And then I worked in a crystal shop in Covent Garden. There's a little yard called Neil's Yard. And I was reading a book on swimming with dolphins. And I just thought, oh, this might be the thing I need to fix whatever it is that's broken in me. And a friend had also given me a handout about going to the Eating Disorder Association for some group therapy. I thought, oh, what do I need that for? I mean, we lived together. She obviously knew I'd had bulimia. And I sort of packed up and went off to, within the week, I'd booked a ticket to Ireland. I went and stayed in a place called Ballintaggart, which is now, it was a hostel at the time. It's now a very posh wedding venue. And to go swimming with Fungi, the wild dolphin. And it became a lifelong love of swimming with him, which I continued to do for the next 15 years while I was living in the UK. And really, that was the impetus for my recovery from mostly amphetamines and bulimia. So I came back from that and thought, oh,
quite inspired self-help to go to Ireland to swim with Fungi, the wild dolphin.
Well, there was something about this. Yeah, there was something about this place, Nigel, not just swimming with the dolphin, but I remember I was very poor. I was earning like £3 an hour. So this is the year like 93, 94, 95. And the people who went there, I didn't know this at the time, but they were spiritual. And, you know, I was, what was I, 23, I would have been 21, 22 years old or something like that. I'd never read anything about spirituality. I'd never read any sort of self-help books or anything, just this swimming with dolphins. And they were so lovely. They said, we know that the showers at Ballintaggart are cold, and we'd love to put you up in our B&B where we are. And so they put together to pay for me to have like a B&B, bed and breakfast, proper Irish bed and breakfast. And I just thought, oh my God, what wonderful people they are. And then when I was swimming with Fungi, I had what Maslow calls a peak spiritual experience. And it was really that sense of oceanic oneness. Dolphins are really smart. And if he comes near me, it must mean I'm a good person, or he knows that I'm not a bad person, or something like that. And he came right up and eyeballed me. And I thought, I just had this massive, what Maslow calls a peak experience. And the whole experience of being there with these kind of people who were all slightly older, probably a little bit further on in their self-development journey, it was just life-changing. And so when I went back to London, I had a friend with anorexia, and I said, look, who do you see for your anorexia? And she said the name of the therapist. And I didn't know it wasn't really a dumb thing to go and have the same therapist as your friends or anything back then, but I actually went and I found a therapist. And I'd actually had a couple of failed attempts. I went through the NHS and they said, oh, it's going to be 12 weeks before we can get you some counselling sessions. And then when I went back to the GP, he said, oh, so you still got this thing, this eating problem? And now I think, of course I bloody did, you know, but they couldn't get me in to see someone. So I ended up with this therapist, and she just happened to be a psychosynthesis psychotherapist. And what she did was, I actually went there first because I'd had the peak experience, but I'd also had an experience a few weeks later where I still continued to take drugs and passed out on the tube in London. And so I'd had a what do we call it in drug rehab? When you hit a rock bottom. So I've had this height and then this rock bottom experience. And anyway, found myself, but really the reason I went was because bulimia wasn't working anymore. And I thought maybe she can help me lose weight. And it wasn't until I got there and a few sessions in, I had come in and she'd written on a board, victim, rescuer, and perpetrator. And we started talking, and then the child, and we started talking about this wounded child. And I thought, what's she talking about? I'm not wounded. And then 7 years later, 1 to 3 times a week, depth psychotherapy, I was, you know, almost completing my therapy with her, and realized that, in fact, I'd suffered with early childhood trauma. And she was psychosynthesis, and she took my peak experience seriously. So she used to bring fungi into the therapy, and she'd say, would fungi worry about what he looks like, the dolphin? And I'd say, oh, don't be ridiculous, you know. And then she'd say, does fungi worry about what he eats? And of course he doesn't, you know. And what we call this in psychosynthesis is the external unifying center. I'm sure it's probably called co-regulator or something these days. So the nature or the dolphin or the therapist holds the secure sense of self and models that and mirrors it back to the client, which I know all this now because I'm a therapist. But at the time, I just thought, oh, isn't she great that she's taking this seriously? So yeah, that was my recovery journey, I guess. And that was, you know, then I spent the next, I spent a period of time in therapy with her, and then she moved back to South Africa for a couple of years, came back, and then I resumed therapy, which was, yeah, 3 times a week for a very long time. I was very, in a very bad place when I entered therapy.
Yeah.
So
God. What a journey. And from Fungi the dolphin and the peak experience to being passed out on the tube in London, terrifying for a young woman, and then finding a therapist, and then, you know, having what sounds like a very long-term secure relationship with a therapist in the UK who was able to model that secure kind of a secure attachment, but also a secure sense of self for you. How did that then lead into your own journey into training as a psychotherapist? What was that pathway for you?
Yeah, so I think the year that she went back to South Africa, I started doing some little self-development courses. There's a place called the Mary Ward Centre in London that ran like Psychology 101, and there was actually a psychosynthesis lady there doing some little workshops that I remember doing again once I started my training. And I thought I wanted to train in psychology. And so I did the Psychology 101 at Mary Ward, and that was for a year. And I just kept having this sense of, oh, this is so dry. I hate this. This isn't what I thought it was going to be. And it was useful, but it was just too scientific and what I know now to be medical model. So then I went and did a 6 months introduction to social work. And because it was in England, it was in this really old building, and I just sort of felt it was very Dickensian, like something out of Dickens' novel or something, you know. And I thought, no, this isn't it either. And I don't know why I was resisting going to the institute. Maybe because, I don't know, you know, transference and everything. Oh, I don't want my therapist to think I'm copying her or something like that. But in the end, I went to the Psychosynthesis Institute, and I did an open evening, and I thought, oh, I'm home. I'm home. And that was a 2-hour evening. And then the first step after that was they call it the fundamentals. And it's a 4-day training of the basic sort of models. I went and did that, and I just felt like my life had been turned upside down. And I thought, okay, I'll take the next step, which so they run in psychosynthesis, the psychosynthesis coaching, counseling, and psychotherapeutic counseling and psychotherapy. And they all start with the same foundation. So everyone has to do a foundation year. It's all personal development. It's all experiential. It's all meant to evoke transference and projections, and you work through those in the room. And in a way, they become the family, and you have to work out all your family shit in the room with the other participants. And they've always got mum and dad sitting up the front, or dad and dad, or mum and mum. And there's always a split: good daddy, bad daddy, good mummy, bad mummy, or mummy and daddy. And the projections thrown onto the leaders, and this all gets worked out in the first year. And I just felt addicted to. There was a lot of visualizations. There was a lot of aha moments. It was just life changing. And so then you had to decide. Again, the next year or two are the same. And I thought, I'll just keep going for my own personal development. And at one point, every year you had to have an interview to see whether you were psychologically ready to go to the next year or not. And then I got to a point where they said, look, you really need to decide if you're going to be a therapist or not, Jodie. You know, you can't go on to do the psychotherapy training, you know, with sort of no clients, and you know, and so I really took to therapy for a long time if I really wanted to be a therapist, and decided that I did. And so the way that it works in the UK in terms of the training, this training, is that you start taking clients from year one. Once you get into that counselling path, you take one client, you bring it to group supervision, which is 6 hours a month, all in one day. Everyone presents six therapists. You all present the client each, and then you have individual supervision as well, and then you build up to 2 clients, and then 3 clients. So by the time you finish your training, you've got a full practice. And the clinic has a low cost clinic, and so you're getting a whole, it sort of is a wonderful way of doing things that I wish they did more of here. It gives trainee therapists an opportunity to be a therapist, and it gives people who can't afford therapy an opportunity to have one-on-one psychotherapy. So yeah, so I went through, and so there's 5 years of training, and then most people take 8 years to complete, because you've got your 160 therapy hours to do. So it's, they assume you'll be in weekly therapy for 40 hours a year, 40 weeks a year. So by the time you have a Christmas holiday, and in England they all take August and July and August off, it works out weekly therapy for 4 years. And then you have to do your right relations group training, and then all your hours. I think there's 500 hours for a psychotherapist to complete, and a master thesis. And yeah, all up, it took me 8 years. And yeah, my master thesis was Call Off the Search: Eating Disorders, a Symptom of Psychospiritual Crisis. And so how we search in all the wrong places and fill ourselves up from all the wrong places for all the wrong reasons. And so Call Off the Search is really around how we come home to ourselves through psychotherapy. And I'm already the self that I'm seeking to become. So that was, yeah, that was my training. So and it's different in the UK, and this is important, I think, at the moment with our environment here too, in terms of counselling and psychotherapy. A diploma in the UK is equivalent to a degree. It's 4 years. It's 4 years. And so when I came home to Sydney, I joined CAPA on a diploma, but it was 4 years. It's the same as a degree. And so I know there's been some comparisons around UK diplomas and Australian diplomas. They're very, very different. They're very different because they are, and you can go on then and add a master's on top of the diploma because it's equivalent to a degree over there. So that's how I progress through my journey. The fundamentals, the foundation, the 4 years, and then the masters. So, and they kind of build it all into one course.
A decent, a long journey, a lot of time, and it is a lot of expense, isn't it? It's a big commitment of a person's life to take that journey.
8 years, and that's we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but I'm part of the College of Psychotherapy, and one of the things that we all talked about was how many hours psychotherapy training we all had, and every one of us had over 850 hours. I think mine was probably about 1,200 hours plus therapy plus supervision. So, and I know a TA training, a Jungian training, psychoanalytic training, they are all, it is more than a training. It is more than a training. It is what we would call a journey of the soul. A journey of the soul.
A full immersion.
And it wasn't academic back then. We got the masters. It was validated through. So a lot of little institutes in the UK, what they do is they get validated through a university. So they haven't had to lose their soul. They haven't had to become just academic. They haven't had to lose their experientialness. My master thesis was full of collage, I'm sure they're a little bit stricter now. that was back in, I think, 2008 I qualified, so it would have been 2007 that was submitted, 2007, 2008. But it's actually a really good way of doing things, I think. Yeah.
And that's how psychotherapy trainings have traditionally been. It's very much experiential. It's very much about learning, how to be as a client, learning about being a therapist through being a client, and then plenty of practice hours that are then supervised and really fully processed through the group and individual supervision process, and your own experiences not only processed in individual therapy but also processed through group experiences. It's not just an academic qualification.
Oh, exactly. And that really, when we're talking about psychotherapeutic work, we're talking about the capacity to work with transference and countertransference. And it's not just recognizing the transference and countertransference, it's how do I use this in the here and now. And part of that training was, I just remember there was someone in my training, I just used to feel so jealous of him all the time because the trainers used to, oh, aren't you wonderful? And so my colleague Tina and I, we would always afterwards say, oh, aren't you wonderful? Aren't you wonderful? But then we'd have to come in and work it out in the group, and we'd say, just having to work that out in the here and now. And I remember once going to get a cushion it was up at Mill Hill in North London, in this massive old buildings, and I remember walking for like 20 minutes to get a cushion, and I brought the cushion back. Excuse me. I brought the cushion back, put it on the floor, went to get my cup of tea, and I've come back and someone's stolen my cushion. Well, we spent the whole morning working out whose bloody cushion it was. And is it yours? Just because actually it belongs to the convent. And what's going on between you two? And so you work that out. So when you get into the therapy and the client starts to have a projection and a transference onto you, whether it be negative or positive, you know how to deal with that. You don't think, oh, I better refer out because they're getting too attached to me, or they're having sexual feelings towards me, and I better set a boundary with them that they're not allowed to do that. You learn through the experience how to be with that in relationship with the client. So it's not just noticing transference, it's how do I be with and work with this? And that's the difference for me with between counselling and psychotherapy.
Yeah, having that awareness, and it's an embodied awareness. It's an experiential awareness, and but first of all, you've got to be able to be aware of it, identify
Absolutely.
it, and there's a whole other aspect of knowing how to work with it in a way that's therapeutic,
and not being scared of it.
Not being actually embracing it, being accepted, seeing it as
exactly
a significant part of the client's healing journey through the therapy.
Absolutely. Yeah, a lot of people, while we're on this, something I do love to rant about, a lot of people always, the client's becoming too emotionally attached and too dependent, and they're freaking out because the client's getting dependent. And, maybe, I don't know, I just think in psychotherapy, that's not the point of the therapy, but the point of the therapy is this person is becoming emotionally dependent for a reason. They have typically never had someone they could depend on. The psychotherapist is there, same time, same day, same place, every week. Like most of my clients at the moment, I've got a couple of new ones, but the longer ones, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years in therapy, same time, same place, same day. That a transference will build. And if you're going to work long term, you need to know how to work with that. And if someone becomes emotionally dependent, you don't say, oh, again, I'm going to refer you out now because you're too emotionally dependent. I know in US groups, I see this all the time, and I think this is where the healing happens. What's going on between you and I? That, what's going on? You're the first person who's ever cared about me. Well, of course, that's going to evoke something. And the job is not to keep them in therapy forever. It's to have an end goal of ending one day, but that they've internalized that external unifying center that we talked about earlier. So they no longer need me. They then go off into the world, and they can meet their own emotional needs. But new clients, they come in as an adult, of course, but then I was always taught this, that the healthy self gets them here 95% of the time. In psychotherapy, you're working with the wound, and so it's about how to repair that through the transferential psychotherapeutic relationship.
And the fact that you've had this long training journey, this long journey of being in your own therapy, part of that is that it creates an anticipation and expectation of longevity, of being patient, that really significant, deep therapeutic change, personality change takes place, can take place over quite a long period of time, and that
Absolutely.
you're part of the learning that you went through is learning to be patient with that, and not expecting that the people that you work with, they move on. You don't expect them to get better quickly, or grow, or not be dependent upon you, or not project all of their stuff. You expect whatever comes, you expect all of it, and you work with whatever is being brought with that long-term goal in mind, but without an expectation that goal will be reached at any particular point in time, accepting that there's a to and fro, there's a back and forth, and that actually the client, they're responsible to a great extent for their own healing. They've got to keep showing up. They've got to keep doing the work, and 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back.
It's learning how to be in relationship. It's learning how to maintain a long-term relationship. And most people who come to therapy have had relationship injuries from the attachment phase. So it is a reparenting in a way without infantilizing the client, but it's so, you know, when we talk about being in our own therapy, it's not just because we think people have trauma and they need to heal the trauma, although that is really important, because we don't. One of the things about being in your own therapy is dealing with your own neediness. You know, I remember if I saw someone coming out of my therapist's office, I just felt, I just want to be your only client. I want to be the one. I want to be the most important. And this is because I had a childhood history where, you know, my dad had 3 or 4 girlfriends at the same time, and I, you know, always having to fight for attention and love and care and all that kind of stuff. And so it is about that, but it's also about, you know, it is about healing trauma, but it's also about the therapist's sense of self and being able to hold relationships long term. Even, you know, we're talking a lot about, and we'll talk about this a little bit more later, the College of Psychotherapy, we've recently just allowed 2 trainings for the psychotherapy training. I will be honest, I was very anti that. I think I even said, what is this, pick and mix lollies? Like a bit of this and a bit of that? I fundamentally disagreed with it, because my understanding of psychotherapy is long-term relationship. However, there's a lack of trainings in Australia, and so I came around and said, okay, I agree. I think that saving psychotherapy is more important than being rigid about the longevity, but they must have A, B, C, D, D. And that's what we came to, because part of becoming a psychotherapist is the relationship you have with your cohort. You know, can you maintain relationships with your cohort? Can you work through difficult issues? Or are you going to do a little bit of a subject here and a little bit over here? And it's like sort of popcorn chicken, you know. So for me, it's these decisions are not made on any kind of elitism or rigidity or anything like that. It's about that there's a psychotherapeutic context underlying them. And but, you know, I feel like we've reached a good balance with that, so that's fine. But the training is all about, it's not just about getting a master's degree in psychotherapy. I know I have a colleague, some people don't even like the therapy that they're studying, but they want the master's. Like, that's not becoming a psychotherapist, that's getting a master's degree. So when we're talking about psychotherapy, we really are talking about a journey of the soul.
Yeah, lovely idea, the journey of the soul, and that's a journey that you do with other souls.
Yeah.
That your cohort is the group of people that you start with. To a great extent, they're the same people that you're still learning and growing and working alongside 4, 5, 6, 7, even 8 years later. And so you've had to figure out how to maintain, protect and be in those long-term relationships.
And, absolutely.
And there has, like, the history of PACFA has been this long history of, you know, of debates between what is psychotherapy, what is counselling, and there's a large body of counsellors who say, just stop it, you know, shut up, we're not interested. There's no differences, just they're just the same thing. And there's a group of psychotherapists who have done the kind of training that you've done, who are really strong in, no, hang on, that's not the case. There is a difference, and this is the difference. The difference is that a psychotherapist is grown. It's almost like a crystal garden that's slowly grown over a long period of time through different experiences and different climates and different environments. And it's all about that capacity to be sustain relationships over the long term, and to be a safe and stable person who's able to be there week in, week out, sometimes multiple times a week for an individual over a long period of time, and to be consistent with that person and be consistently supportive and nurturing and sustaining allows relationships of dependence to develop, trusts that racial relationships of dependence are part of the learning journey, because in your own training journey, you've been on that journey yourself. And it does, you know, the position essentially of the College of Psychotherapy is that it does create a different kind of practitioner, a different kind of therapist with different kinds of capacities that have been developed over a long period of time, and that's important and worth protecting. It's worth.
Oh, it is, and that's why
saving.
you know we're seen as being very difficult. I know we are, but we are so passionate about this depth of work, and I really want to say here too, I don't believe that counsellors don't also work at depth. Of course they do. Of course they do.
And the longer one has been a counsellor, the more one has grown and developed and actually been in many long-term relationships with supervisors, therapists, trainers, trainees, clients, groups.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's right. But you know, if you said to me, my husband and I couldn't have children. We went through IVF. We had 13 rounds of IVF and it didn't work. And then we decided to go down the adoption route. But at that point, intercountry adoption was slowing down. And someone came and did the talk about foster care. And we were like, oh, we didn't even think about this. So it was called foster to adopt at the time. Some people have a very strong reaction to that. I know it's not necessarily a good way of looking at things, but that's how it was sold to us. And so we had our 2 kids come to us at 11 months and 2.5. What happened was I used to see clients all day Saturday. And when you take a client for psychotherapy, you are making a commitment for the next 10 years of your life to this person. And so when the kids came to us, I thought, oh, I don't know if I have the capacity to do that anymore. And so what I decided to do, I thought, I don't know how to work short or medium term. I mean, and I'm not saying counsellors only work short or medium term either. So, but I didn't know how to be a counsellor in a way. I really didn't. They do a lot of things that we don't do, and very important work that we don't do or know how. I mean, we do, of course we do. But so what I came up with was some coaching packages, 6 sessions, using one of my psychosynthesis activities that I'd done in my training. So it was 6 sessions and then they end. And I thought, oh, this is great, because now with kids, I can take clients more shorter term without having that long-term commitment. So this is also a difference too. When you work as a psychotherapist, there is a commitment to putting this client first for that 1 hour a week. It could be up to 10 years or more even for some people. I had a client recently who was seeing someone for 17 years. So there are those differences, but and also I although I trained in psychotherapeutic counselling, which is akin to psychotherapy. So even as a counsellor, I was a psychotherapist. So yeah.
Do people sort of want to know? Or I want to know too, I suppose. The how do you have a sense of discernment or differentiation between somebody who comes to you and you think, oh, okay, counselling or coaching, and someone who comes to you and you think, oh, okay, this is long-term psychotherapy, and how do you make that distinction, and how do you make that distinction?
Look, one of the problems that I've got is that all of our training at the Institute is the same training up until you go on to do the masters. So I would say I'm a psychotherapeutic coach, because I know that even in coaching, transference and whatever else, and attachment issues and injuries will still get stirred up. I don't care what anyone says, this stuff's still getting stirred up. It's how we work with it then that becomes a difference. But I think for me, my coaching is very much, my practice is full. I do have space for 6-session coaching. We can focus on one issue. If someone comes, I've got maybe 1 or 2 people at the moment that I thought, this probably isn't going to be long term because of the, I don't really like to use the word resistance as much as what I used to, but let's just call it that. However, it's 8 months and still coming weekly. But the way I work with clients, what I do is I say to them, come for a 90-minute session, and it's for you to get to know me and to see whether I'm the right therapist for you. And I think this is important because there's probably a lot of counsellors who can't get clients, can't hold clients, can't get past the first session. And for me, it's all about connection. And if we go back to my kids being adopted, most of my training over the last 10 years has been in attachment theory. I mean, it was the core of psychosynthesis anyway. There was a very strong psychoanalytic component to that. And we had actually Jarlath Benson, who wrote Working More Creatively with Groups. He was our analyst. So a very experienced analyst. We looked at object relations, attachment theory, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, so it's interesting. Whenever I mention the kids, I drift off. What were we saying?
Oh, there's a lot involved in having kids. A lot of mental energy, and you've had to restructure your practice around it. And you were talking about, I was asking around, differentiation between,
oh yes, differentiation, yes.
See for coaching or
yeah.
psychotherapy. The follow-on question.
That's right. So I do the first session, and it's all about connection. There's no tick sheet I have questions in my head, and we ask the golden questions in psychosynthesis, and why are you here? Why now? What would it be like if you still have these problems in 2 years? What would it be like if you don't? So you're creating what we call the emerging purpose. So what is seeking to emerge out of this client's symptoms? And so then I say to the client, look, you can let me know today, or you can let me know by Wednesday. We'll do 6 sessions together. We'll contract for 6 sessions. And then at the end of the number 6, we'll have a review and see if you'd like to move to open-ended therapy. And over that next 6 weeks, really, I don't focus on skills or solutions or any of that kind of stuff. It's all about the relationship. And it's all about, when that client comes on that first day, they are 1 hour old. We're 1 hour old to each other. We're like mother and baby. And then we're 2 hours, and then we're 3 hours. So I'm always thinking about the relationship and the strange situation, the attachment strange situation where the mother comes and leaves the room and a stranger comes and goes. And then at the end of the 6 weeks, we do the review, and then they decide. And I would say I've probably had 2 people in 20 years who haven't continued. And so even if I thought they were going to be short term, they're like, oh yeah, like me. I thought I was here to lose weight. Actually, I've had a lifetime of trauma underneath that. So, and then it's about whether the person's ready to, do you want to, start diving into all this? It's deep, long, arduous work. So, yeah, most people I wouldn't work with for less than a year. I can't think of a reason why that has happened, to be honest. But I think there's something in your website and stuff that speaks of a different sort of vibe anyway. And they know from the first phone call. I'm just letting you know, therapy with me is weekly. I don't ever deviate. Don't come in 2 weeks telling me you want to come fortnightly. It's not going to happen. I only take weekly clients. So do the 6 weeks and then decide if weekly's for you or not. Do not come in 2 months and say, I want to go fortnightly. It won't be happening. So I'm very upfront, and I frame that in a psychoanalytic frame, in that I don't believe that this is conducive to good therapy. And for other people, it might be. If that's what you want to do, that's fine. I've got a list of therapists I can refer you to. That's not how I work. And they feel safe and secure in that, and as a psychotherapist, 2 weeks between sessions, it's like the strange, just like the mother leaving the room for 2 weeks and then coming back and expecting the baby to be happy with that, So that's kind of the frame that I hold when I start working with people.
Yeah, clear frame and clear boundaries and very well developed sets of expectations around psychotherapeutic practice.
Yeah.
You talked a little bit about one of your influences there. Can you talk some more about psychosynthesis and the key influences of psychosynthesis, and what you continue to really embrace from that training in your practice, and maybe then also start to talk about, you said you've continued to do I think psychodynamic attachment training over the years since you qualified in psychosynthesis. So can you talk about that as well, and how it might be the same or different, how that integrates with the psychosynthesis approach?
Yeah, so look, Roberto Assagioli, he was a Florentine. He's Jewish and Italian Jewish, and he was a colleague of Freud and Jung. And Jung and Assagioli started to split from Freud because they felt that psychoanalysis on its own was limiting. And they were both spiritual people. So Assagioli was very much into the Kabbalah and Jewish mysticism, and Jung was on his own spiritual path. And Assagioli, from very early on, like 1908, was bringing in spiritual practices into his work. And he brought in a lot of Buddhism, a lot of the Jewish mysticism, and so he was really one of the first people, along with Abraham Maslow, to bring in that sort of spiritual element. So what we would say the best of Western psychology and Eastern and Western spirituality merged in together. And he was really he was a fan of Dante. And so one of the core models that we do in psychosynthesis training is our Journey of the Soul model, actually, which was every Friday. So we trained 10 weekends a year, and the Thursday was all day supervision, Friday in the morning was Journey of the Soul, Friday afternoon was group forum. So the whole institute had to come together and sit in group therapy together. Oh my God, it was hell. It was like 200 people in group therapy. It was actually hell. But the morning, Journey of the Soul, we did things like Dante. We looked at Dante for the year, and how that dive into into one's suffering, and back into purgatory and paradiso, and it's the perfect psychosynthesis. And I don't know if I've got it here. I keep losing it. I've got my little egg diagram. So psychosynthesis, he was also known as a thief of other models. And so what he did, he has the egg diagram, and the lower part of the egg is the lower unconscious, where we work with all the psychoanalytic components. In the middle section is the existential gestalt, here and now in the room, like how are we doing right now, Nigel, between us in the relationship. And then the top section is the transpersonal and psychospiritual. And so every session we dip and dive into one of these areas. And then at the core is the little self, and at the top is the spiritual self. And people like Richard Schwartz have gone on to use this model in IFS. ACT stems from this. I remember going to Russ Harris's training, and he said, yeah, I got this idea from this old hippie training that I did back in the 70s or 80s or whatever it was. And I actually said to him, I've just qualified. You do realize it's still, psychosynthesis still exists. So his observer exercise, which actually comes from Buddhism, but it came from psychosynthesis, was the first therapy to actually use body, feelings, mind, and soul, and the subpersonality, which is now used heavily in IFS. And the reason I love this so much is because it is a truly inclusive and integrative model. And it places spirituality at the core. Even if you have clients who are atheists, we still hold a spiritual context, in that we see that this client is a self or a soul on a journey. And I don't mean in religious terms, but it could be if someone is religious. We hold at the core that they are whole and unbroken, and whatever symptoms they come with are just symptoms, I guess. And what is seeking to emerge out of this client's symptoms. So, we would look at world crises and any crises. So Asa Jolie contributed to a book called Spiritual Crisis. So we look at spiritual awakening and spiritual crisis, or a spiritual emergency, they call it. And so even things like the pandemic, there's this big problem. How are we going to relate with that problem? What's seeking to emerge out of this problem? That's the focus of the work, not fixing the problem. Yeah, so someone comes with an eating disorder, and okay, you have this eating disorder. Well, what's seeking to emerge out of that? Self-acceptance, self-love, self-care, self-determination, all the selves. And that is the focus of the work, not, oh, have you kept a food diary today? Because we know people with eating disorders are already in battle with food. The last thing you want to do is have a battle with them as soon as they start therapy. I keep that for way, if I ever, but the focus is on who is this person seeking to become. And so that, for me, led into a whole lot of other people, because we've got the psychoanalytic branch, we've got the existential, we've got the transpersonal. So my influences are varied, but I because I was recovering from an eating disorder, I did loved Mariam Woodman's work, so post-Jungian, and did a lot of women's workshops with I was very lucky at the Institute, because you could kind of get away with a lot of really interesting CPDs because of the psycho-spiritual nature. So you could actually do spiritual retreats and they'd be classed as CPD. So I did a lot of women's workshops, living in Europe at the time, so in France and around the UK. And and then attachment theory was my other thing. So because we were going down the adoption route, I started to read, there was a very good book called Attachment Focused Parenting by Dan Hughes. I think every therapist should read this book. It will teach you about how to be a therapist to people with attachment injuries, which is almost everyone. And so really down that sort of route to raise our children, really through foster care to adopt. So my kids are now 15 and 13 and a half, and were adopted in May since 2012. That's how long it took. So, that's being part of the system and all that comes with that. But so I think attachment injuries, and I use I think we were going to talk about modalities later, but would you like me to bring it in now?
Well, I guess that's where we're at. The kinds of the specific kinds of skills you talked about. There's a specific a technique that you use from psychosynthesis in your coaching practice. Anything else specifically around the kinds of modalities and skills that you use? You talked about the integrative and the experiential, the gestalt, the existential. You've done training in acceptance and commitment therapy and internal family systems. You've done a lot of spiritual work, attachment learning. And there's the kind of the psychoanalysis as well as the mysticism and Buddhism inherent already in that approach.
Yeah, look, mostly because I work with women 27 to 35. That would be my women. 27 to 35 is my niche. Probably like a dry drunk in a way. They've recovered from their eating disorder, but there's still something wrong, or they're still having problems with food. And so what I do with clients really is a lot of inner child work. I really love being someone's first therapist and doing that early mothering sort of energy. And I say energy, I'm not mothering the client. And then working towards the father energy as we end, like, it's sort of like do you know the circle of security? So, you've got the hands on the circle. That first part is around, like when the child, you sort of give them a little push, like, you can do it, so it's a weaving in of this masculine and feminine energy and mothering and fathering energy. So a lot of inner child work and really subpersonality work, or what they now call IFS. I prefer the subpersonality model. I think for me, IFS is way too fussy. I think, why are you getting into all that? There's no need for all that. I much prefer a more simple, even going back to ego state, parent, adult, child, I think is, just less fussy. So I love subpersonality.
Can you talk about the subpersonality work and how that relates to IFS? My entry into this part of the conversation is the assumption that all of the models that are eventually embraced by psychology, they've had to go through a process of being codified, manualized, able of being replicated again and again after fairly short periods of training, and only then can they be measured, and only then can they be validated. And so lots of old ideas have been repackaged by ACT, DBT, acceptance and commitment therapy, dialectical behavior therapy,
all the synonyms. I mean, all the acronyms.
Even eye movement desensitization, reintegration therapy, and internal family systems work as well.
Look, Richard Schwartz talks about internal family systems being the first one to sort of have the self at the core and to be non-pathologizing. That's actually not true. Psychosyntheses, subpersonalities, what we would see is that, so if you imagine a circle, and this is like the subpersonality, on the outside we've got behavior, like postures, the clothes we wear, that's outside in the world. The next bit is a want, and then a need, and at the core is the quality that is seeking to emerge. What is the emerging purpose of this subpersonality? So it might be a rebel and behaving, marching off to Canberra and the pandemic and whatever else. Well, what does this part want? Oh, it wants recognition. Well, what does it need? Actually, it needs love. What's the quality that this subpersonality has? Well, maybe I'm thinking compassion for other people who feel squashed down or being told what to do. And so what we're seeking actually out of that subpersonality is actually compassion, not to be marching along and getting violence and whatever else. It's actually the call is actually compassion. And so for each subpersonality, the self is at the core, and we want to bring forth the self and integrate it back into the personality. So we say we're already whole. These are our little split off parts that have had to split off. Again, Schwartz says that they're not caused by trauma, I think, but we would absolutely say that some parts are inherent, but some parts are definitely caused or exacerbated and then split off in that splitting, severe psychological splitting and dissociation. So we're working always to bring the parts back in. And so one of the ways, for example, a lot of clients who have been depressed, for example, I might sort of knock on the door, and then they'll say to them, so ask who it is, and they'll say, oh, who is it? And I'll say, it's depression. And they'll say, go away. And I'm like, how do you think that depressed part is going to feel, you yelling through the door to go away? A lot of therapies work at trying to make the depression go away. CBT is a good example of that. I'm like, no, let's try again. So I open the door, come on in. Come and have a seat. Would you like a blanket, a cup of tea? Like, what do you need? What do you need? And the client's like, I don't like that depressed part. It's ruining my life. Well, maybe we need to be a bit kinder to that part. So we're welcoming in and accepting, and then looking at the value. Like, what's the value of this part? What value does it bring you? What's the purpose of it? And it's all sorts of reasons why someone is depressed. And one of the things I talk about, especially, I can maybe talk about it now because we're still talking about modalities. In the pandemic, I had a full-on existential crisis, dark night of the soul, and I started to train in nature therapy, and it was in the UK. So I was up all night training for a whole year, and then doing my exercises in the day, and then sleeping in the afternoon. And I'd go and sit in the woods and just sit in the dark woods and being depressed in the woods at my local nature place. And one of the things that I thought often was, if I went to see the GP right now, I would be medicated for severe depression, probably. But because I was a spiritual psychotherapist, I thought, what is seeking to emerge out of this? And one of the activities was to build a nature circle from things that you found. So I made this circle, and then the scrub turkey came and started, because it was leaves, it started like building its nest inside my circle. And I had to ask the circle, you had to take a problem to the circle and say, and I said, when's this pandemic going to end? When is my existential crisis going to end? And the circle said, just keep coming back to nature. I was like, you got to be kidding me. Where's my aha? Like, where's like a proper answer, you know? But I kept coming back to nature every day. And what I realized is, thankfully, I had trained in psychosynthesis, and it just reminded me of right intention, wrong intervention. There are so many people with depression who are being medicated and solutioned, CBT'd out of their depression. But what if it's a spiritual depression or an existential depression? What's, think of Viktor Frankl, and his mad search for meaning. What is the meaning of this depression? And that's why with psychotherapy too, I think I got all the time in the world to sit and find that out with you. So yeah, I think nature therapy was another thing that I think is increasingly important, just to be able to sit with and be with what's going on in the natural world, and the natural world as a healer, but also trying to heal the natural world at the same time as well. Kind of got off track then. Sorry,
no, we're talking about other modalities and skills that you've trained in, and you've been sharing your reflections on how how the kind of the new approaches in psychology are often are mirroring and reflecting much older ideas that haven't been codified and manualized, and so are able to be validated. And so there's a service that's being done there. At the same time, nature therapy became more important, and something that you used for your own to move through your own dark night of the soul, your own existential crisis. And it talked really again to the core idea of your practice. We have this idea of a philosophy of practice, and what I'm hearing that at the core of your philosophy of practice is the idea that what you are accompanying is a journey of the soul, and it's the journey's soul. It's the soul's journey towards wholeness, and it's the soul's journey towards back to itself. And that you can do all of this work at a certain time in your life, and your soul can find its way back to itself, and then something can happen. COVID lockdowns can happen. The world can change. We can lose a partner, a parent, a child, and the journey, the soul loses itself. Gets disconnected from itself once again, and the journey back isn't always an easy journey. It takes time, and the answer that nature gave you was just keep coming back to nature.
Very frustrating at the time.
Yeah. But well, I think fungi would have had something to say about that.
Oh, absolutely. Well, it was actually at that moment, in one of the activities, fungi came up, because they'd give you an activity. You'd have to go to nature for 2 or 3 hours a day, and then come back and journal it on the online forum. And I actually realized, I thought, I've actually been into nature therapy since fungi. Like, how have I not really thought of that? I mean, this was the impetus for my healing. And but anyway, I just wanted to come back. You said something about philosophy of practice. So one of the other things for philosophy of practice for me is that psychosynthesis is a psychotherapy of love. And one of the things I notice, you see it all over Facebook, about keeping that professional distance, and I don't know, I just sort of think, if my therapist hadn't have loved me to bits, I would not be here today. I just felt loved by her. And that is how I have always practiced as a therapist. And I haven't really, I've probably only ended with a couple of clients very early on. Might sort of say why, because it'll be obvious. But for me, if I thought I couldn't grow to love this client, I wouldn't work with them. And the movie Stutz, I mean, look, there's been Jonah and Stutz. There's been some controversy around one or the other, but in essence, that loving relationship between the therapist and the client is I think just so important. And I had a little quote here, actually. It was from Jarlath Benson, who was my psychoanalytic trainer. He says that the crisis that clients arrive with, a terrible conflict which centers around longing to love and be loved, while being afraid to love and dreading being unlovable. How can we not love them? Like that to me is my whole philosophy of practice, is to love the client to bits. And what's his name, the other one, the gift of therapy, Yalom, he said, don't be stingy with clients. Don't be stingy with your care for clients. And I think that is really ultimately what I hold as the context for my work, is really just loving this client to bits. And there's going to be pushback, that comes tricky in the therapy. One of my things as a cancellation policy is that I have is, because I'm pretty strict, they're allowed 4 weeks holiday and 3 last-minute cancellations a year. Otherwise, they pay for the session. But what I do in the session is that when if a client has to pay for a session and they're not here, I spend that session down in this therapy room holding the client. So one of my clients, for example, who was in a children's home, she actually said, I asked them, what would you like me to read? She said, Jane Austen. And so if that ever happened, which was only a couple of times, I read some Jane Austen and then kept reading it, But this is like, some clients are like, why would I read that outside session time? Because you want to get to know this person. Like, there's something in this book that speaks to this person. Well, in this book was a whole lot of abandoned babies. And so then the next session, I might say, I read chapter whatever in Sense and Sensibility. And the client might say, what did you think about the da? I said, well, what do you think about da 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 da? And so then what happens is that even though the client has paid for the session and not here, I was still holding them in mind. So what Winnicott would call going, helping the client to go on being. There's another term that he uses, I can't think of it right now. But again, it's still very much based on attachment theory, even the cancellation process. And so then this is huge for clients because they've been abandoned. And guess what? This therapist didn't abandon me, even though I wasn't here. And but for some people, that can be overwhelming too, So it's a dance about how you love the client. A little bit more, a bit of a dance, and that's when obviously talking about altruistic love, not romantic love, in terms of obviously boundaries there.
But back to the soul, isn't it? You're kind of you're loving the soul of the person. It's not about their body.
No,
maybe not about their personality. It's about their soul.
Exactly.
And is lovable and inherently lovable.
Yeah. See, you're perfect at psychosynthesis, Nigel. We call that bifocal vision. So we look at the soul and spirit of the client, and then everything else that we work with in the therapy, the behaviors, the body, matter.
Always keeping one eye on
the
fact that it's the soul that you're really working over the long term. And the space that you're in now, the space that we see behind you, is this your therapy space where you practice?
It is. So this was part of my existential crisis in the pandemic. I had saved for 5 years to take the kids out of school for a whole term.
Mm.
And we were going to go to London, Copenhagen. We were doing a cruise around the Baltic, a cruise up Norway, Iceland, Greenland, Canada, New York, Boston, New York. And it got cancelled. And it was devastating. I had actually spent every night for like 3 years booking. I paid everything up front. So it was about $60,000 all paid. And then the world went to shit. And I thought, what about all my money that I thought I was doing good because I'd paid up front. And so I was on that phone ringing around. I got everything back. And then we couldn't go anywhere for 4 years. So I said to my husband, like, you guys are driving me mad at home, because we in Sydney, we had the 20-week, I mean, not as bad as Melbourne, of course, but we had the 20-week lockdown. We had the Northern Beaches Christmas holiday lockdown, and then we had the initial lockdown. And the noise, because I've always worked from a home office. So it used to be in my house, and the kids and Paul would go down to my mum's, who's 5 minutes down the road, while I saw clients on a Saturday. And obviously the pandemic, it was all sort of online for a while, but I just sort of said, why don't we, now that the kids are a bit older, take half of the kids' rumpus room, take the old sauna, which we'd never used, and turn it into a separate entrance therapy room. So I didn't get my holiday, but I got my own therapy room. So I work here Mondays and Fridays, and I've just started running group supervision on a Saturday. And my husband works down here on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And it's all like 3 levels of soundproofing. And there's a little kitchenette and bathroom and everything. And what I did in the pandemic was come down here and sleep over down here while I was doing my nature therapy training. So that would go till about 4 or 5 in the morning. And then I'd sleep and get up and take the kids. I ditched schooling. That just drove me mad. So I took the kids to the dam with me and bush schooled them. So whatever my nature therapy activity was, that's what the kids did for their schooling that day. And I just thought that was so much better than 80 slides of PowerPoint. So yeah, so this is my therapy room. And yeah, I tried a clinic twice and hated it both times, and came straight back home. Always preferred working from home.
What can you tell us about the setup? How, you know, this is custom built. So what can you tell us about
I'll turn the
what the important features are for you?
Yeah, so I've got a couch over there, and how are we this side here? So there's a little window, and it's got that's from the Ukraine, that dream catcher. I had that custom made, and then I sit over here. I did buy some really fandango chair, and I hated it, and went straight back to an IKEA tub chair. You know, just that old-fashioned. I just find I find it quite holding, having the tub around me, and good posture, because you know, when you're sitting all day, it's a nightmare. So I bought like a stressless, and I just felt like I was leaning back. I just felt completely exposed, and I don't know, like I was floating in space somewhere. So that's currently down at my dad. I've shipped off down to Dad's house and went back to my cheap IKEA chair, which is you know, so much better. But and I work half online and half in person. I still do prefer in-person sessions, if I'm honest. Lots of bits and bobs here for like chair work and sub-personality work. And I do my I've got my, you know, little bear for inner child work. And you know, because people, and in fact, until I had kids, I didn't know how to soothe myself. I remember my daughter one day crying for like 2 hours, and I rang my friend. I said, is this normal? Like, this kid's crying for like 2 hours. Like, is this, because she came at 2.5. I hadn't parented before she was 2.5. And my friend said, yeah, you just sit and, you know, pat, soothe. And I thought, oh, this is what's been missing from my life. And so I often, you know, teach clients how to, and I might say, you know, would you like to take it home with you for the week, take care of the baby, and all sorts of things happen. I left it in the car, and it shriveled up, and okay, what's going on? Let's look at it. So that's why I prefer in person. There's more creativity, I think.
Oh, so much that's possible in terms of the in-person space, particularly when you've curated your own space and
Exactly.
all of the books, the double-decker London bus up on the
Oh
top.
yeah.
A range of dolls and toys scattered about, the cuddly, soft cuddly toys, the couch, the pillows, your chair. It's all set up for you and the work that you do.
Mm-hmm.
You did though start doing online work, and it's become a hot topic in counselling psychotherapy at the moment, in terms of is this inevitable for our profession? Is it something that we should resist? But you've sort of been dabbling in both. You prefer the in-person. What's been your experience of the online space and doing therapy in the online space?
My nature therapy course went for a year. You had to do the core modules, which was 6 times 6 hours, and then you had to do 80 hours of nature therapy workshops. So because it was in the pandemic, it was all online. I noticed they're doing some little bits and bobs now that are in person in Scotland. But look, it was fine, except that it was the middle of the night, because you had to go out and practice in real life, out in nature. Now, the year I did it, it was the year that it rained in Sydney every day. Like it still feels traumatizing to me that year, not because of the pandemic, but because of the rain. It was horrendous. And so for me, like, I was going out still in nature, rain, hail or shine. I bought my bobby boots and I thought, I don't care how much these cost. I'm going to go and get these boots so I can go out, rain, hail or shine. And, so, but it took a real discipline to go out every day to do the activity. If you're at a training weekend, you're there anyway, and then you walk off and you go and find a tree and whatever else. It is definitely easier. And there were days where I just thought, how am I going to get out? Like, it's just horrendous outside. And so I became very creative. And there's a little, I don't know if you can see it, there's a little pack of cards, Mindful Kids. It's got sway like a tree. So I found ways to do nature therapy indoors, which is one of the workshops I did anyway, how to bring the outside inside. It could just mean, like, for example, my tissue box has cockatoos, and it could mean meditating on the tissue box. So you can still be very creative. However, my psychotherapy training, if I did that online, oh, what a loss that would have been. What a loss. I just think it would still be good, but I just feel like, I think my personal opinion, in the College of Psychotherapy, we are allowing online psychotherapy trainings. If you're training, if there's an option of doing one that has even a week intensive versus not, I would always take the one that has some in person. I just feel like being in the room with people, and yet saying that, last weekend I did a CPD called Sealskin, Soulskin, Women Who Run with the Wolves story. It was online and we all broke off into groups, and it was excellent. It was excellent. And I couldn't go to that. I used to have to pay $10,000 to go overseas for tickets, the course, be away from the kids. I didn't have to do that. So there's, I think I'd like to see, I know people are complaining that PACFA still doesn't just have online. I think there's a reason for that, for me personally. And I think if you can do an in-person component, I would definitely try and do that.
It goes back to
be better.
It goes back to the formation of the therapist, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And how difficult it is to really deepen and have to confront difficult relationships. An online space makes it so easy to avoid things that we want to avoid.
This is really important, because it's like the cushion scenario. We would never be able to work through the cushion scenario online. Another one we had was a group drawing process. So we came into the room, the floor was covered in art paper, and we had to draw our space that we take in the room. So I've counted, there's I don't know, 18, 20 people. Okay, my piece of the pie starts here. I'm going to take my piece of the pie. So I've started from the center and I've drawn my triangle to where I'm sitting, my piece of the pie. I've collaged it and drawn it and whatever else. And then I've stood up and thought, oh, fuck, it's the biggest piece of the pie. No one else had taken a piece of the pie. The girl next to me, she had the same therapist as me. So we already had issues because we had the same training therapist, my therapist that I loved and that she had. And then she had this little mouse on the paper. And she said to me, trust Jodie to take the biggest piece of the pie. Oh, hang on a minute. Don't you make me causal because you can't take your space. So this is all then getting worked out around who's taking space and all that kind of stuff. That doesn't happen online. That doesn't happen online.
Yeah, much more difficult to create those kinds of opportunities for interaction and growth.
Exactly.
So Jodie, you have been talking as we've been going along about the College of Psychotherapy and the contribution that you're now making to the profession of psychotherapy through PACFA, PACFA College of Psychotherapy. So would you like to talk about that? Would you like to talk about how it is that you've come to that, and just any more thoughts or feelings that you'd like to share about the state, the state of the profession, and what your ambitions are for that?
Yeah, so back in when I came home in 2006, this is how one of my other streams is business coaching therapist. So my practice has been full for over 10 years. I've got probably about 100, I think, not probably, I have got 141 people on a wait list. They know I've sent them other therapists and all that kind of stuff. And one of the how that came about is that back in 2006, when I moved home, we still had phone books back in that day. Psychotherapist wasn't even in the phone book. And I've just finished, well, I was still doing my master thesis, actually. I'm doing this 8-year training. I'm thinking, why haven't they got psychotherapists here? And I've actually been the sort of probably second or third existential crisis in my life, thinking, oh no, I've just spent 8 years training and it's not even a thing here. And then I realized everyone called themselves a counselor. I thought, oh, that's okay. I'm trained in counseling as well, so I can call myself a counselor. But then sorry. So then what happened was that I sought some business coaching, and my business coach said, no, people aren't doing depth psychotherapy anymore. It's all CBT, ACT, DVD. I thought, oh, don't, you're killing me. Like all the acronyms, and then I thought, oh, stuff you. I am going to make psychotherapy happen here. So this is before I even knew of PACFA. I think I was with CAPA back then, who then merged into PACFA at some point. So CAPA New South Wales. And I started a blog called Therapy Rocks. And that was the beginning of my blogging journey. And I just talked about psychotherapy. And I made it my mission. I thought, I need to put psychotherapy on the map here. I didn't realize there was already people doing that somewhere else. And then, of course, then we merged into PACFA, and I found myself very frustrated many times thinking, why is there no psychotherapist as a president, as a CEO? They're all counselors. And it used to really wind me up. Like the amount of times I've ranted about that in my head, because it was the Psychotherapy and Counselling Federation. And it wasn't until I saw your interview with, what's his name?
Tim Johnson-Neil.
Yeah.
Tim Johnson-Neil.
Oh, I loved this interview. I've watched it 3 times. You know why? Because that's the last psychotherapist I see, like proper old school psychotherapist, And he talked about that split back then. And one of the questions he asked, I want to find this. Oh, yeah. He said he doesn't know where we are now, but he was disturbed by the merging of counselling and psychotherapy. And psychotherapists are still working with this dilemma, as we've talked about it earlier. And, you know, there's a lot of choices within the college that have been out of our control. They're board decisions or PACFA decisions, and we as a team have had to work with that. And sometimes that's been very frustrating, because that's not how we would do it as a psychotherapist. But we know if we want to gain credibility, we're going to have to go with it. And so we've tried to find a balance between being credible in the eyes of the government without losing our soul. And sometimes that's really tricky. And there's a lot of, you know, because of this lapsy-daisy approach to psychotherapy in Australia, historically, there's a lot of people who have been trained in psychotherapy who perhaps it wasn't even psychotherapy. And that's really challenging for people now to realise that course isn't going to get me into the college. And I personally feel pissed off about that for them. I think the colleges have known this for years. They've been told several times. I even rang them back 2006 about this assignment that one of them does have one session of psychotherapy. I wrote to them and said, that's not psychotherapy. I didn't even know about PACFA then. That's not psychotherapy. This is, and to have to sit there and judge what the therapist is doing, and they're not even in their own process. Like, nothing about this is psychotherapy. So, yeah, we're having to make some pretty big decisions within a framework that we don't always agree with, and at one level, but we do at another level. And it's finding a balance between that. But how I came to that is because I used to complain to PACFA all the time. And one day Johanna said, you know, would you like to have a phone call? And she said, have you thought about coming onto the college? And I said, I can't. I'm too outspoken. I get too dysregulated around things that I'm passionate about. And I don't think it'd be a good idea. And then as time went by, I thought, oh yeah, maybe it is a good idea, but I'm still all those things. You know, I'm still too outspoken. I'm still get too dysregulated, and it's because we don't want to see psychotherapy proper die. And I'm very fortunate that the people on the college, we're all different styles of therapists. We're all from different modalities, but we all have one central agreement that we do not want psychotherapy proper to die. And you know, I don't know whether people realise or not, but volunteers at PACFA, we're working like 30, 40 hours a week volunteering sometimes. And we don't make decisions lightly. There's always a group vote. There's always consultation with the head of practice, head of education, CEO with you. You know, it's a very, very, it's a big job, but we're very passionate. And we all also always just keep coming back to the relationship in psychotherapy, and that it's the way we work with it is slightly different. So yeah, so that's how I ended up here. And yeah, we're about to run a webinar. We still need to organise that. We're collating all the questions. We did a survey last year, so we're collating a lot of the questions from that. People who have been calling and had issues with what we've done, we're going to be considering all those in the webinar as well. And one of the things I'm really proud of is, you know, I said to you before, you know, I was very anti-pick and mix courses, but you know, over time I've softened and grown to be more inclusive. Narrative therapy, for example, what we realised, you know, most Indigenous Australians prefer, I can't say most, I don't want to speak for them, but narrative therapy is very popular. And so I reached out to someone who is a registered clinical psychotherapist. So that's the title if you're a member of the college. And she's also in the, how do you say it? CATSIP. so she's a member of both. And
the College of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Healing Practitioners.
Exactly. So I wanted a psychotherapist who was also in that college. And I reached out to her and said, look, we need a couple of courses for people who have maybe got 680 hours, i.e. Gestalt people, to top up their hours, because the general membership has taken their hours and now they've got 280 left over. We're looking for some slightly shorter courses. And narrative therapy was one of the ones that I suggested. But I said, I want to know, do you see it as psychotherapy? And it was actually Gina O'Neill that I spoke to. She said, yes, I do, and this is why. And so we didn't all agree with that, but we felt, who are we? We're not none of us are Indigenous Australians, so we can't make that choice. So we included that. And then we talked about including nature therapy for the first time as a modality, because it is the biggest issue of our time. And so we need to be more forward thinking in the modalities that we include. But the one thing that remains is that the relationship has to be at the center. It's not a skill ticking modality, like, am I going to learn these skills? Now, skills is part of psychotherapy, but it's only one part. And so every single modality on that list, and there's others, we've just approved someone else for something else that wasn't on the list. And that's why we say there, email us if you need help with your modalities, because what happened is it came through. I thought, okay, this person's got certification of 3 years in this, but it's not on our list. We take it to the college, and then everyone has a vote on whether they think it is or not. And then someone might come back and say, yeah, you haven't voted yes, but what about this? Oh yeah, I hadn't thought of that. So I think there was 500 when Ernst came back from holidays. There was 500 emails about 2 courses. This is not something that we make a decision lightly about. There is a lot of back and forward. There's one thing at the moment. I think there's been 17 or 18 emails back and forward about one of the other issues in the guidelines there. So, when people send through complaints, when they send through questions, we go away and we actually think about, hang on, what in this is actually correct? What's incorrect? Oh, okay, we haven't communicated that very well. We need to make sure that we, there was something that came through that I sent an email in, even though I'm sending this as a psychotherapist, not as the deputy convener. What does this mean? Data cleaning? That doesn't speak to me. What is that? So yeah, that's a fine line too. As a member and as a deputy convener, like there's, but yeah, I think what we are really happy about is that we have been more flexible. We've even included sensory motor psychotherapy that people can do online, Pat Ogden's training, some AEDP, which is shorter term dynamic psychotherapy. So it does really mean that there is a lot of choice there for people. And, courses that we believe will develop the therapist's sense of self, not just tick the hours. It's not just about having the 450 hours. It's about developing the sense of self, like becoming a psychotherapist. And yeah. I don't know what else to say about that.
That formation, the therapist is key. And it is key in terms of differentiating, what we refer to as a counsellor, which can be skill based. Often involves a lot of training in many psychotherapies. I think most of the trainees in the country cover a lot of psychotherapies, but they don't do that. They don't do one psychotherapy for a number of years, over hundreds of hours with the many hours of therapy within that modality. And what you're talking about talks to the complexity. PACFA is 25 years old in 2024, and psychotherapists have always been right in the center of what PACFA have. We've always, there's always been psychotherapists on the board. We've got a College of Psychotherapy that's been around for quite some time now.
2017, I think, isn't it? It's
about 7-8 years.
Yeah.
And you know, what you're talking about talks to the complexity and the difficulty and the challenge of carving out a space for psychotherapy within a country where sort of counselling has become the vernacular, but an insufficient vernacular to encompass psychotherapy, particularly because, you know, we've had a history in this country of including people with certificates and diplomas under the umbrella of what constitutes a counsellor, and even the formal trainings in counselling, many of which you talked about historically and even currently, have included the, you know, Masters of Counselling and Psychotherapy in their title, because it's such a draw card. It's such it's so appealing. People want to be psychotherapists more than they want to be counsellors. And there's a lot of it, like I have students that I supervise that are just devastated when they find out that this course that was sold to them as counselling and psychotherapy isn't recognised as a course in psychotherapy. And we need to push back against the training providers and say, hey, don't stop, you know, it's misleading and deceptive conduct in a way. Don't stop misleading your students into believing that they're doing a course in psychotherapy when we don't recognise that as a course in psychotherapy. We recognise your course as a counselling course. That's right. And, you know, there's one in particular. A few weeks ago, I was Googling integrative psychotherapy courses UK. I got an ad, Master of Psychotherapy, Australia. I thought, I don't know of any called Master. I've been looking at a lot of courses. You know, I've been doing the College of Psychotherapy inbox. So I've probably, I don't know how many hours looking at courses. And when I clicked on this, I thought, you cheeky buggers, you are one of the ones that I know has been spoken to about counselling and psychotherapy. You're actually advertising now as a Master of Psychotherapy. You know, it's deceptive and it's not fair to people. It's not fair to people. But, you know, and look, as people send through courses I've done this course, I don't just sit there and reply and say, sorry, no, it's a blended course. No, I actually go to the website. I go in, I download that, even if I have to put my email address in, I go in, I get the course outline, I read the whole, like 30, 40, 50 pages of course outline before I then think, does this warrant sending off to the group? Okay, here's this one. I've highlighted these paragraphs. I believe that this blended course does speak to psychotherapy. So we recently looked at the Can Miller course, and that is we put that on the list as a counselling and psychotherapy course, because the whole way through they talk about the therapeutic relationship. They talk about this, they talk about that, they've got this, they've got that. I think, okay, tick, 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 tick. If there's a course and the therapeutic relationship isn't mentioned once, like I know for a fact that that's not psychotherapy. Ken Miller, experiential this, experiential that. Okay, experiential, that's one of our other key points. And then if you look at one in Western Australia, Edith Cohen, I'm not sure which one it is, but one of them is it's counselling and psychotherapy, psychodynamic the whole way through. And then you look, they learn about object relations, they learn about attachment theory, they learn about this, they learn about that. So it's not that all counselling and psychotherapy courses wouldn't be approved. There are just some that just don't meet the mark. And, you know, it could be easily corrected in some ways, you know, but it's about whether, you know, there's a lot of bums on seats at the moment, and that's, you know, a problem. One of the things I want to say about the college, a lot of people are emailing asking why would they join, as you now have to pay a fee. The amount of hours that staff have been dedicated to the college for the last year. I know they've moved from experiential therapies, and now we're, you know, and then it's going to be the College of Supervision or whatever, moving around the colleges to sort them all out, is unbelievable. But
One of the reasons why we recommend joining the college is because anyone can call themselves a psychotherapist, even someone with no training. So there is no way of differentiating who is a good quality psychotherapist versus a hang a shingle on the door. Oh, I think that sounds good. And I want to come back to your draw card. Actually, I may as well say that now. I think because counselling has been so undervalued, that it's almost like, oh, if I think if I call myself a psychotherapist, it's going to help bring value to me. I have never seen counselling as a lesser than training than psychotherapy. It's just different. And I think if counsellors, and I know there was a post in the PACFA Facebook group, if counsellors were to really value, they don't need to do that. And then PACFA modelling value by placing them at the centre there, I think that's useful too. I mean, it is a they are both excellent professions in their own right. And if someone does want to go on to become a psychotherapist, it doesn't mean that counselling wasn't enough or it's not good enough. It just means I want to work in this particular way. Yeah. Or I've got my really good foundational degree now, because counselling training was probably different before as well. I've got my foundational degree and I just feel like there's something missing. And I wonder what that is. And typically that's a modality thing. Like for me, it was that psychospiritual aspect. For some people, it might be somatic, or it might be TA, and so, or it might even be nature therapy. So, yeah, by joining the college, you are actually telling people that I have had rigorous training, and also we need to grow the college, and we need to grow it to be seen by government and whatever else. And you know, we can't keep complaining about not being seen and they're not participating in the being seen. You know, it's I know for myself, I thought I can stay in victim around this psychotherapy not being in the phone book, or I can do something about it. And I went and started that blog, Therapy Rocks. So we have to do something about it. We have to train in it. We have to write about it. We have to tell our clients about it. You know, it's our job to participate in the recovery of psychotherapy, in my opinion.
Yeah, thanks, Jodie. I think what you've been saying about the College of Psychotherapy and different training providers that might lead to accreditation or not in psychotherapy, and the membership, like the membership side of the college that only occurs now. Historically, we had affiliates who hadn't met any training requirements but were interested. And so PACFA had to make the really difficult decision of ending, essentially terminating all of those affiliate memberships and saying, look, if you want to be a member of the college, you actually have to meet the certification requirements of the minimum levels of training. And it talks to the role of a professional association within contemporary society.
Yeah.
And our roles are, it's for counsellors, psychotherapists, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander healing practitioners, creative and experiential therapists, supervisors, and relationship counsellors, where we're up to at the moment. And our role is to say, well, there's a minimum standard to be recognised as a counsellor, and this is the standard that we, as the profession, on behalf of the profession, have set. And then there's another standard that needs to be met in order to be recognised as an Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander healing practitioner, psychotherapist, creative experiential therapist, supervisor, relationship counsellor. So then if you want to join one of those colleges, you have to meet that standard. Otherwise, it's not credible. Otherwise, it's just a club that anyone can join, and it's got no value. And we're a self-regulated health profession. So we have to do this on our own. We don't have the clout of government regulation that the Australian Health Provider Regulation Agency provides for other professions like psychology. So we have to do this on behalf of our profession. And so then we need to determine which training courses, which training providers, and which of their courses sufficient to, first of all, certify people as counsellors to a certain standard, Then, which ones do that for psychotherapy and psychotherapists, for Indigenous healing practices, for supervision, for relationship counselling, for creative and experiential therapies. So then we've got to set that standard. And then once we've got sufficient membership in those colleges to say, yes, these are the people who have been certified by their profession as sufficiently qualified, experienced and practiced and competent in their profession, then we can get on with the job of communicating to government, to industry, to the public about the similarities, the differences, the strengths of each of those approaches. And that's also a big part of our role. But that has to be built, and it takes time. We're still a young profession, 25 years old. That's really young in terms of trying to bring so many different disparate groups and interests and ways of doing things. And that's the early arguments that are still there around which therapy is best. No, my therapy is the best. No, I love my therapy. So it's that's kind of been a big part of our history. And it's taken a lot of time to find its way to, okay, what can we agree on? What can we say is consistent? How can we then communicate that to training providers? And then how can we communicate to the public, what therefore they can expect from different professionals at different levels of certification?
Yeah, I agree. It's it's really tricky, and I want to come back to that, which is best. It's really what's really hard is I know this is probably going to sound like one of those privileged discussions, but what's hard as a psychotherapist is it's really we get called elitist. We get who can afford that, who can afford to go to therapy like that, only a certain amount of people. I don't know what the answer is for that. I really don't, but I don't believe that warrants us lowering our expectations of therapists, because if you go on to be a social worker or a mental health social worker, I did a social work degree. I came home to Australia, couldn't find psychotherapists, realised that Medicare was a thing, my least favourite topic, and I went and did a social work degree because I thought I needed to get Medicare. There's a 1,000-hour placement on a social work degree, and then to become a mental health social worker, there's the other 2 years of whatever you need to do for that. To become a clinical psychologist, you do a degree and then you do a post degree. Doing a degree in counselling and then doing post psychotherapy training is no different to mental health social worker or a clinical psychologist, if we're framing it within what we're framing it in. And I guess I want to reiterate too, the College of Psychotherapy did not come up with all of this. This is part of a strategic plan within PACFA that we all the colleges have to negotiate how to figure that out for each college. And so the requirements, these things given to us by PACFA, and then how do we make this a little bit more flexible at our end, sort of thing, and but the one thing we agree on is that people will go and pay to do a social work degree and do a 1,000-hour placement. You're not asking social workers to not do a degree or postgrad training. You're not asking a clinical psychologist. I think we're in a transition period where 2 or 3 years people will just go, this is what you have to do. But we're at that awful moment. That's what I said, we talk about in the college, like, we're the like transition people that everyone's going to hate, which I know there's some out there that do, but that's not going to make me change my mind about lowering the standard, because you're then not a psychotherapist. You're just saying that you are, and that's not good for clients. And that's ultimately, like I said in my PACFA journal article, people, if they're coming for psychotherapy, they need to know that they're getting psychotherapy. And no one is better than the other. It's just different. That's all. That's all. Like, you wouldn't say Indigenous healing is better than a counsellor, or, of course, it's different. Yeah, and there might be some counsellors in there and some psychotherapists in there. We were all counsellors. My first training was in counselling. It was the happiest day of my life, the day I got my counselling award, because before that, I was just, excuse my language, I was fucked. And then I was a counsellor. Like, you couldn't turn it around more than that, you know. So for me, it was, you know, fantastic day to get my counselling diploma, which again in the UK is 4 years equivalent. That's it, I guess.
Yeah, it's big stuff, and we are in that space of transition and development. We're still young. I think sometimes people expect a lot from a profession because, you know, they pay their membership fees, and, you know, it feels like a lot every year, and so they expect a lot. And you know, it's a black box. Every organization is a black box. You know, it's difficult to see inside what's happening, and when you pay a membership fee every year, you wonder, where is that going? How is it being spent? Who's benefiting, you know, from this? And it's a big challenge for a new profession to find its way to unify as best as it can, and then to sort of create and recognize and credit these different pathways. It's a really big job, and there is a lot of there can be a lot of disappointment for individuals along the way, and a lot of frustration. And so part of my job, I'm president of PACFA at the moment. I have to wear a lot of people's frustrations and disappointments, and you know, the hurt that people sometimes feel as a result of decisions.
You're talking about identity crisis, especially around this. You were in the psychotherapy and now you're not. Like, it's hard. I mean, you know, I read email, and you know, there's been times where I mean, I won't say which brand of psychotherapy, but I remember someone, I won't say who, saying, Jodie, let's make it up, you're a psychosynthesis sympathizer. And I'm like, I'm not, I'm just saying, like, you know, I'm trying to get this person across the line because we really want people to get across the line. But, you know, but just one thing I want to come back and say about the fees. Like, I went to Melbourne. We had a day in Melbourne earlier this year, as you probably know. We met with Johanna and the College of Psychotherapy, and with Nee and Sophie, and I could not believe how, what's the word I want to use, how much work was going on. I actually thought, and I'm sure lots of people think like this, that there's one little person on the membership line, and then there's one person. So I've thought, like, you know, where are my fees going? I walked in, I thought, oh, now I know. I couldn't believe. And then Johanna said something like there was 70,000 emails at the membership. I thought, 70,000 emails or something like that. I don't know. Don't quote me, but it was something like that. And I thought,
don't quote me. No. There's a lot, 30,000, I think, or something.
30,000, was it?
Huge numbers of
30,000 is a lot.
Long phone calls with members, and then and all the different areas of the profession that we need to attend to, so that it is credible, so that it is seen as being valuable, and because we're at great risk of being discarded. Some of the other mental health professions would be happy to not see counsellors on the map. And so we have to work really hard, and it's a lot of work. It's a huge amount of work to get where we need to go and to maintain.
Yeah. Well, I've answered 70 emails in the college box, and one of those was like 70 people, 20 emails back and forward. So even that, like, I know, like, I think, oh, wow, okay, this actually takes a lot longer than I thought it was going to take. And it's 3 client hours, the fee. You know, I mean, we only have to see a client 3 times to pay, to be represented, and to be, I see a lot of posts online around not joining an association at all. When I was trained, it was a privilege to join the UKCP. I didn't join BACP. I joined the UKCP, and it was a goal. It was a goal and a privilege to. I'm qualified and I can join a professional association. Like, there's, and I don't even think that is being drummed into people in their trainings. But you know, the fact that the client has somewhere to go to complain about me if they need to. God forbid, if, you know, I don't want that happening. But you know, there's something bigger holding me is how I always felt about having association membership. Even when I was angry and pissed off and disappointed, well, I would email and tell them I was.
Yeah,
much of the way.
It's the idea is that it's a family, it's a community, it's an identity.
Exactly.
It's a shared understanding of how we see the world and how we work to help people in the world with whatever problems are that they're coming to us with. And that's what the profession offers, and it offers that not just to its members, but it also offers that about its members to the outside world.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's right. I agree. That's why I volunteer for PACFA.
Me too.
Yeah.
Anything else that you'd like to share, or are you happy to leave it there?
Oh, I think well, maybe I'll give myself a little plug, seeing as I wasn't very good at that earlier. Yeah, I obviously run a Facebook group for therapists who are trying to build their practice. So I've got a blog challenge this week for anyone. So one of the ways I became very successful is through blogging. I rank higher than BetterHelp. So if you are concerned about not getting clients, which we see all the time, create yourself a nice juicy blog aimed at your niche. And the challenge I have this week is Mental Health Day, which is on the 10th of October. And I've put a call out for everyone to write a blog about their niche with Mental Health Day. And so then everyone comes back and shares them, and then you can share other people's. And that to me is alleviates this competition thing too. We're not in competition. People, they'll see 3 eating disorder therapists. They will go with the one they feel most connected with. And one way of doing that is by having lots of juicy blogs on your website. So opening the door on private practice. Feel free to come on in.
Thank you very much, Jodie Gale. It's been a pleasure.
It has. Thanks, Nigel.